Hello and welcome to this presentation. My name is Lorna Driver-Davis. Today I'm going to be speaking about endometriosis, causes, symptoms and natural remedies. This is me. I've been practicing as a naturopathic nutritional therapist for over a decade now, specialising in endometriosis and women's health. And I regularly lecture other nutritionists and medics and students on the subject, as well as working with thousands of women who have endometriosis and symptoms and conditions that are associated with that condition. If anyone's interested, I contributed a case to an evidence-based peer-reviewed chapter last year on endometriosis. This is actually a really great resource. In fact, the whole book is, if you're a student or practitioner, and I'll talk more about that at the end where you can get that from. I also present to charities such as Endo UK, and I'm really excited to be back here lecturing for CNN. I have been a guest lecturer for CNN on and off for about 10 years, and I actually created their first short course for herbal medicine. As part of my background of training, I have a herbal training. My mum is a herbalist, so I grew up in a naturopathic herbal household, and this is kind of the reason that I became a practitioner. I'm also head of nutrition for Wild Nutrition. We only make natural food-based supplements, and we are the only company to have a formula specifically to support endometriosis symptoms. Understanding their condition. So the chances are that you actually, in your friendship group, maybe know someone who has endo, or perhaps you have endo yourself. So it's kind of a lot more common, I think, than people actually think. And these figures could actually be much higher, considering it takes such a long time to get diagnosed, and it's really complicated and lengthy. It's kind of much harder to diagnose than things like PCOS, for example, because you haven't got a single one kind of blood test that you can do. And the journey that women kind of go on to get there is kind of complex. Plus, you know, some women don't end up looking into those symptoms until perhaps they're thinking about having a baby. And people can be on contraception for a long time, over their 20s, for example. So this can kind of mask symptoms. So this is kind of contributes to perhaps some of those figures are probably a lot higher. So, you know, symptoms don't always start when you get your period, but they can do for many. They can actually occur sort of later on. So you can have endo really kind of from the point where you start your periods, or it can happen a lot later. And it's important, I think, to kind of understand that this can happen in perimenopause as well, because you get a change in hormonal fluctuations. And, you know, women can have endo and have treatment for it, and sort of the symptoms can go away and they can think it's completely gone. And then it can kind of come back again later on as well. So, you know, it's complex really in terms of its lifeline. And about half of all women will go on to develop it again within 5 years of surgery. Now, this is a really important point, because that, you know, from my point of view, this is why we want to be thinking about all the things that we can be doing to help the body to, you know, hopefully not have to have repeated surgeries. There's no one specific cause of endometriosis. I'm going to talk about some of the etiologies, but it's kind of easy just to think it's a blend really of being a gynae condition. It heavily involves the immune system. It's part autoimmune, and it's also something that you can sort of, you know, inherit as well. But remember about with inherited factors, you know, you can have the genetics to perhaps, you know, predispose you to a condition, but it's about your environment and your life and your nutrition and all those things that kind of affect whether or not you go on to develop that disease. And also some women can have a condition that would perhaps then make them more likely to go on to develop endometriosis. So it kind of overlaps with different conditions. So what is endo? Okay, let's make this really simple. So you're only supposed to have your womb lining cells in your womb, but what can happen, and there's many reasons why this occurs, that they can move to different parts of the body. Now, most commonly, endo is found in the pelvic area, and you can see on the diagram what tissues and organs that kind of involves. More rarer locations include things like the lungs, kidneys, nose, spine, and so forth. And this also means that when women go on to have surgery, if that's necessary for them, this might also involve different types of doctors getting involved. So you've got a gut specialist, or perhaps you've got a lung specialist, you know, as well as just having a doctor who specializes in women's health. So once those cells have moved, they settle and they start to grow. So becoming kind of part of the tissue of that area. And they form these kind of patches or lesions. So I think kind of imagine if you could see on the inside of the body, they're a bit like a scab or a wound site or a kind of burn. And, the immune system identifies them as being something that needs to be healed, but also something that needs to be potentially almost like attacked. Because remember, those cells are not supposed to be there. So the body's sort of going, okay, what are you doing here? And at the same time going, oh dear, there's obviously an issue. I need to work on kind of healing. So you've got this sort of both sides kind of going on here. Now, these patches or lesions respond to the rest of the cycles that women go through throughout the whole month. And so those patches actually bleed at the same time that you would menstruate. I'll give you a very unusual example. So very rare locations will include endometriosis in the nose. So this means that when you have your period, you get a nosebleed, or it's a bit like that. That's much more rare, so don't worry. But that kind of gives you an idea about how the two things kind of interconnect as well. You can get adhesions. So because these lesions or patches are effectively kind of very angry, upset, inflamed, they get kind of sticky. And it means that you can end up with inflammation that kind of amplifies to other parts of the body. And it's quite common to get these organs and tissues stuck together. So when women are complaining about discomfort and pain, you've got the lesions themselves that are an issue, but then you've got the addition of discomfort and pain from the adhesions as well. And so surgeons will have to try and kind of release these. And that's a complex area as well, because sometimes it's difficult to completely release them. And, particularly if it's affecting things like the ovaries or fallopian tube, and a woman is of childbearing age and thinking about conceiving, sometimes women will go back for repeated surgery once they've had children to finally kind of release up adhesions and have treatment, because at that point it doesn't matter about perhaps damaging the ovaries or fallopian tube. So again, it's treatment and support is really individual depending on the individual case. So as I was saying, these patches respond to the hormone estrogen and other hormones circulating. There's kind of one point to make as well, is that those patches themselves make their own batch of estrogen. So you get what's called localized estrogen. This kind of hyper intensifies the levels of estrogen in the body. But funny enough, if you were to do a standard blood test for estrogen might look pretty normal, because we're talking about that localized production rather than the kind of global amount that you're kind of measuring. And these patches are really inflamed, pretty kind of upset, and a bit kind of confused with themselves in terms of the immune system, something to heal or something to try and attack, is that kind of mixture going on. There are also other types of inflammatory hormones, and the immune system will produce cytokines, which are immune proteins, which are part of kind of inflammation. So you've got a pretty kind of angry, kind of upset kind of area there. So endometriosis is very different to classic painful periods. And, just take that sort of note in your head, because this is where, misdiagnosis can occur. Women don't get the support that they need, because remember also period pain is, something that women will maybe try and sort of get through or take painkillers. But the pain exhibited in endometriosis is usually on a really, really much big higher level. Women can kind of collapse and faint. They can be ending up in A&E, and all the pain can just be so difficult. It's difficult to get through a work day. It's difficult to focus, difficult to concentrate, and often that pain is not easily resolved through taking things like painkillers or using hot water bottle or that sort of thing. But it's an important point to make, is that the amount of endometriosis you have does not indicate the level of pain. So you can have a very small amount and you have a lot of discomfort and pain, or you have quite a lot and you don't really have much to complain about. Certainly I had a case of a client where I got her as a client, and she was 65 or something, and she was telling me that she'd had a gastro operation, and when she came round from that, the doctor had said, "Oh yes, all gone well. Da, 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 da. Oh yes, I can see that that you have endometriosis." And she was like, "What?" "Oh yes," and explained what it was and everything. And it turned out she'd had it her whole life, and she'd never have been affected by it, and she'd gone on to have several children. So this kind of gastro operation was, when she was like, 63 or something. And he could see that it was there, but it was really old. So what that means is the lesions and patches have now kind of scabbed over. If you imagine the process that you would go through if you kind of had a scab on your arm, but it's the presence of them as well. So they're kind of old, historical, sort of non-active lesion sites. So, there we go. Interesting story. So the NHS guidelines, so this is what doctors use as part of the beginning of the diagnosis. So we've got chronic pelvic pain. We've got dysmenorrhea, but this is period pain that is really on a sort of bad level. And this is actually where you should make a symptom diary, because it's important that you're noting down things that perhaps you can't do, because pain is very difficult to describe to another person. So, it's good to keep a symptom diary for your doctor so that they can really understand sort of the level of pain that you're experiencing. Pain during or after sexual intercourse, painful bowel movements. So kind of gastric digestive issues and painful bowel movements are actually quite a big symptom in endometriosis, because you can get lesions and patches around the intestines. And then, urinary tract infections, urinary symptoms, and then also infertility is really, really super common. And just important to note is that endo is not a condition where you're just thinking about having pain during your period. There can be there can be discomfort mid-cycle, and of course, going back to me saying about adhesions, adhesions, if they're there all the time. So you could be having discomfort and pain at any time of the month or during certain times. Like I'll have women who will talk about being able to feel their adhesions when they exercise or do certain types of exercise, or of course when they have sex. Now, those are the NHS guidelines. There's things that I look out for in clinic, and I have a lot of experience with working with women where endo wasn't even, in their head, but we're starting to sort of think it is, or maybe understand it a little bit, but really didn't think that they had it. And so I do a lot of help with supporting women, having the confidence to speak to their doctor, to write down a list of symptoms and put some evidence together so that they can get the help that they need. So other symptoms that I commonly see are they experience chills or fever-like symptoms. So they kind of feel unwell. Like if you imagine slightly like you feel like you're getting a bit run down, maybe a bit flu-y almost. This could be during ovulation or before and during their period. This is again important to keep a diary, say over 3 months, because if you're getting that feeling every time you have a period, it's clearly linked to that, and it's not necessarily that you picked up a bug or something. Really heavy periods is a really common symptom. This can often be to do with the fact that progesterone levels can be maybe not as good in endo women, and so they don't have the progesterone to support the womb lining. So you have a very estrogen-based womb lining that kind of collapses, and you get a lot of menstrual flooding. And then quite severe PMS and PMDD. So this is kind of PMS, which becomes, something that really, really heavily kind of affects your life. And then, other symptoms and conditions. And this is where having a discussion with a nutritional therapist is really helpful. If you've got thyroid issues, if you've got gastro issues, if you've got other types of immune issues, if you have an autoimmune condition, these are all things that you kind of want to look at in association with your quote unquote period issues. This is where I really do think that working with a naturopath or nutritional therapist who specialise in endo can kind of really help with this as well. So some of the other symptoms I see is that, women who have endo tend to be really tired, or energy is not very kind of consistently good. And then also can actually be a big contributor towards things like ME and CFS as well. I also see, musculoskeletal issues and women being a bit hypermobile. This is sort of key area also to be thinking about other types of therapies, that can kind of support the musculoskeletal system. And then other issues around fertility and miscarriage. And I mentioned also autoimmune conditions. In the case chapter that I did in the textbook, that client, who's anonymous in that case book, she had Hashimoto's disease, and actually it was an interesting sort of hypothesis to, did she first get a thyroid disease and then this kind of kicked off the endo, or was the endo always there and that kind of was made worse by her later on picking up the thyroid disease. So, anything that involves the immune system will, is going to have a big kind of connection back with endometriosis, because it's also an immune issue condition. The diagnosis isn't straightforward, and this is why it can take some time, or it's kind of missed. It would be really easy if you just had one single blood test, but we don't. And symptoms can be masked for a long time with medication or the contraceptive pill. And I find sometimes it's difficult for doctors to distinguish between period pain and endo, and this is why it's really important to go to your doctor with lots of helpful symptom diary information, and to work with a nutritional therapist who can kind of support you with that kind of confidence. There are also specialist endometriosis clinics across the country, not in all counties, and it's not accessible for everybody, but it's always worth doing your research and finding out as well. And as I was saying in the first few slides, sometimes women will end up going through other diagnosis processes before they actually get to the point of it being seen as a reproductive, gynae kind of condition, if that makes sense. So they may have spoken to kind of a gastro expert. I've mentioned here also the official parliamentary inquiry into endometriosis. If you're really, really keen, this is worth having a look at. This was basically an absolute groundbreaking idea that the government have, was to do a survey on women who have endo and look at their access to healthcare and how they feel and their experience of the condition and everything. So it's really, really interesting. So what are some of the reasons that you can end up with menstruation, or how does that kind of occur? So probably the most officially recognized theory is what's called Dr. Sampson's retrograde menstruation. And this is basically where you've got menstrual blood is flowing back up into the pelvis, and you can see on the diagram there, going back into the fallopian tubes. Now, retrograde menstruation is actually fairly common and doesn't cause an issue in lots of situations. So you kind of have to question what's going on with women who end up getting endometriosis and it develops as a disease. This is where if retrograde menstruation is super common, why do those women end up with retrograde menstruation, but then the body doesn't somehow deal with it in a normal way? It ends up as a disease, if that makes sense. So something has to happen in order to happen, and I'm going to come to that in a second. Genetically predisposed to be. So as I was saying earlier, just because this is in your family, it doesn't mean it's going to develop. In fact, I would say that, the younger you are, if you're listening to this, and you know that there's endometriosis in the family, this is the point where you kind of want to be looking into anything that you can do to support yourself naturally, to sort of not end up like that. In my case chapter, one of the reasons I chose that client was because there was a concept that I developed called the sibling factor. So basically, you've got these 3 siblings. One ends up with endometriosis. One has lupus, which is another estrogen-fueled condition. So you've got similarities between the sisters there. All 3 of them had thyroid issues. And so it kind of gives you an idea that, even going on to maybe develop another type of condition, how things are all sort of interlinked back into the immune system, back into autoimmunity, back into hormones, basically. But again, just because you have that disposition, it doesn't mean you're going to go on to develop. There is a theory around lymphatic or circulation. So this basically means that those tissues and particles are somehow allowed to travel around the body, and then they end up in different places and they can settle. But again, it's like, if that happens, what is not in place for those cells to be not allowed to grow and develop and turn into disease? And that's where I'm starting to introduce this concept of defective immunosurveillance. So this means that those uterine cells, those womb cells, are ending up in different places, but the immune system is not recognizing that they're not supposed to be there. The immune system should be coming out and going, "Oi, what are you doing here? Off you go, jog on," So that brings me to the sort of the immune dysfunction aspect. So some of these theories or etiologies are sort of blended together, and certainly in some cases, women will probably have a little bit of the both kind of going on as well. Environmental causes is a really, really interesting area, and I'm going to talk much later in the presentation about things that you can do with lifestyle and the environment and how that can affect you. And there's a lot of research, for example, looking at dioxins. So these are looking at toxins affecting the immune system and the progression of the disease. And if anyone wants to know more about this, there's a lot to look into in this kind of area. Metaplasia is more likely to occur when you are growing as a baby in your mum's tummy. And so this is actually where your own uterus cells, when you're growing as a baby, will then move into different parts of the body. One theory I heard from a absolutely fantastic endo consultant who's also very into nutrition, she was saying to me that she thinks that this is one of the most common ones where women will report endometriosis symptoms from literally the point that they actually have their periods, meaning it's all ready to go. You just need to start menstruating. Not always, but I think that's kind of an interesting theory. I definitely, and this is a very sad subject, see that endometriosis has a really big mental, psychological, and social kind of impact on the women living with it, but also definitely kind of family and friends and partners kind of around it. You know, I have seen, the breakdown of relationships, a lot of sadness around obviously infertility and, affecting how much work you can do. Thank goodness, every year, it seems to get better in terms of employers understanding around, women having endometriosis. I think the difficulty is that, and this has been the case for a long time, is that it's still seen as like, oh, you have bad period pain. And then how women are treated in this country with bad period pain is, well, hot water bottle, take some painkillers and kind of get on with it. So I think it's employers and family really understanding that this is a very, very different situation. And, as much support is kind of needed. One thing to also say is that considering it, inflammation is a big part of endometriosis it's an inflammatory condition, to kind of summarize that. There's a relationship between the gut and the brain. And so if you've got an inflamed abdominal area, basically pelvic area, that is going to then affect the brain. And so, women can suffer from low mood and depression. And this is again where, anything that naturally can be done, any kind of support, working with healthcare practitioners, working with different types of therapists is kind of really, really, really important. Endo is also a very nutrient hungry condition. And research shows us that women are often very low in key nutrients that are important, which are there for managing inflammation, therefore supporting the immune system, therefore supporting sex hormone balance. But those nutrients are also there for mental health. So zinc, good example. Zinc is important for female health, the immune system, but it's also really important for the brain and mood. So I think this is also why those women, you could probably argue, maybe wouldn't have been ending up with low mood or depression if they hadn't have developed endometriosis. That's my point, basically. So just a little bit of history. So I love this kind of area. I love looking at dietary history and social history around medical conditions and natural practice. And so, okay, so the longer that you go being pregnant and breastfeeding is actually protective. So a long time back, if you had endo, your doctor would have just said to you, well, get pregnant and your symptoms will go away. But that's obviously not a choice or desire for everybody, or so that might not be possible if you have fertility issues. So women would have spent much longer being pregnant and breastfeeding, and that basically means there's just less periods. We have children later these days, and so think of it this way: every period that you have, if you have endometriosis, potentially can worsen the condition. Now, I say potentially because that's not always the case, and endo can stay just as it is for a long time. And again, if you're making efforts, medically and also nutritionally and lifestyle based, hopefully that isn't the case. But just looking at it from a historical point of view, if you were having a baby at age 18 or 19 or 20, and then having more babies, and then probably having a lot of years of not having periods again, women would have probably breastfed for a lot longer as well. So particularly actually families that wouldn't have had access to a wet nurse or anything like that, and then, look, hey, we're in our modern world that we're in. Food is less nutrient dense. We are more fast living. We're more stressed out. We don't get enough sleep. All these things that kind of affect our hormones and affect our immune system. And certainly autoimmunity as a subject, and being kind of immune weak. I mean, I'll give you an example. So I'm 38. So when I was at primary school, let's say you've got a class of like 20 students, there was one child in my class that had asthma. One child. And when you speak to parents today about kids that are asthmatic or they have eczema or allergies, that's a lot more of those kids in that class of 20 or say 30 kids, endometriosis and or other organs and systems. So liver detox is a super important part of managing the condition. So your body has has hormones that it makes. Once those hormones have been used, it actually needs to get rid of them. So you've got this kind of constant production of a hormone, using the hormone, and then needing to get rid of it as well. And detox is a really complicated thing, and it is so important that we have the right nutrition and nutrients and lifestyle to support that. I think it's a little bit of a misnomer to think that your liver just kind of jogs along, doing a really good job. It can do a all right job, I think, but for a really good job, you need to give it some love effectively, and that's the whole point of what we're discussing kind of through this lecture anyway. But detoxing estrogen is kind of a delicate thing, because the estrogen has to go through a conversion into different types of estrogen, and some of those types of estrogen actually are a lot more sort of toxic as it goes through those phases, a lot more damaging to the body. The body's very clever, and then finally will turn the estrogen into a safer, kind of less harmful form, and then it will go down into your bowels, ready to be excreted through bowel movements. I'm not going to talk about genetics too much, because I know this is kind of members of the public talk, and this might be too sort of complicated, but it's good to understand that there are emerging areas in nutrition and nutritional medicine and nutritional research. One of the things looking at the role of estrogen is that when I work with clients, I do genetic testing to have a look at what's going on, because some women may have much more predisposed to estrogen issues, or might find it much harder to detox estrogen, and there's more risks there. That allows me to go, okay, what do I need to look at in terms of biochemical pathways and supporting them better? What foods would be more appropriate? It just kind of gives you some insight. So if you're thinking about doing this kind of thing, please work with a practitioner, because genetic reports are complicated. And just bear in mind, if you do a report and you haven't got any help from anyone, you can be looking at stuff and going, oh my God, that looks really, really terrible, I'm going to get really ill, and kind of freak out. Don't do that, because genetics are not always what's happening. It's just a little piece of the puzzle. So it's so important to talk about progesterone, and I don't think this is kind of discussed enough. And so progesterone is kind of the sister, but sort of opposer or balancer of estrogen. So it's a really important hormone. It helps to maintain a healthy womb lining. As I was saying earlier, this helps to prevent kind of menstrual flooding. And actually, there's a really great relationship between progesterone production, which is mostly produced through ovulation, and supporting mood. If you're a woman who experiences premenstrual symptoms, you definitely want to look at the whole progesterone kind of subject, and get some kind of support with that, because PMS symptoms can be a sign that you're not producing enough progesterone in your luteal phase. So this is the second half of your menstrual cycle. So where do we produce progesterone? Well, the main site of production is going to be through ovulation. We do produce smaller amounts in the adrenal glands, but basically, if you're ovulating, you should be producing progesterone, not always at the quantities that you want. Now, if you were to get pregnant, what would happen is that the corpus luteum, which is basically like the leftover egg sac, so when you release that egg, it leaves behind this kind of egg sac, and that cleverly produces its own progesterone. So if you were to get pregnant, then actually the you and the baby are relying upon that production of progesterone from the corpus luteum, and that goes on for kind of the first 12 weeks. Now that's partly why that first sort of 12 to 14 weeks of pregnancy is kind of the most risky, because there's an aspect of that where if progesterone is not strong enough, it potentially could end up in some issues, early miscarriage. Just to remember also, if you are on the contraceptive pill, or you're using a hormone coil, or anything kind of in that category, or an hormone injection, you're not going to be ovulating normally. So just kind of bear that in mind. So you won't be producing natural progesterone. So without ovulation, you don't have very much progesterone kind of produced. These are some of the symptoms of that. So shorter luteal phase, so that's the second half of your cycle. So less than 10 days between the mid-cycle and the start of your period. Heavy menstrual flow, just irregular cycle in general, period pain, issues with conception. I mentioned miscarriage a second ago. Mood symptoms, and then also low sex drive and libido as well. So interestingly, not to veer off too much, but in perimenopause, where ovulation can start to stop, or be less common, You can start to see with women getting symptoms of low sex drive that they hadn't had before. And it's a good thing to kind of have a look at progesterone there. And there are lots of things you can do at that stage as well. So, progesterone is kind of important to keeping estrogen kind of in check. And there's a lot of research that shows that women who have endometriosis kind of have issues with not always necessarily that they're not producing enough progesterone, but you have what's called receptor sites that are a little bit like, if you imagine you've got like checkpoint towers. The checkpoint towers have got their sort of torch and they're sort of shining it out and they're looking for progesterone, and progesterone is kind of walking along, and then it can shine the light on it and go, oh, hello, progesterone, and the progesterone goes, hello, like this, and they have a conversation together. So in endo, there is kind of an understanding that sometimes that doesn't quite work. So progesterone is walking along, but either the checkpoint tower doesn't have a very good light, so it just can't see it, or the person's facing the other way and looking in the wrong direction, so they sort of miss each other slightly. So, dietary wise, in terms of progesterone support, you want a lot of healthy fats, because fats are the raw materials to make what's called steroid hormones, not steroids as I'm talking about people taking steroids because they want to get bigger muscles, but that's what we call them. That's their official term. So such as things like, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. We need healthy communication between the brain and the ovaries. That's a bit like, the manager in a factory and the workers, okay, having a conversation together, okay, saying, hey, can you make these hormones, please, and anything where we kind of get stressed or we don't get the kind of balance of that we kind of need, like, basically we need to eat, we need to drink water, we need to sleep, we need to not get stressed, we need to move, these are all things that kind of, if they're out of balance, can get in the way. Because look, remember that ovulation is not essential for you to literally live. What's essential is your brain works, your heart keeps pumping blood, your liver doesn't, liver gets rid of all your toxins. Like, these are kind of the essential things, not ovulating. So going back to kind of understanding the relationship between endo and the immune system. Now, I literally could make an entire presentation with the same amount of slides just on this topic. So if you're interested more in this, there is so much to look at. But just to give you kind of a little bit of a drop in the ocean. So those patches produce their own estrogen. Now, what happens is that you get this relationship where they produce more estrogen, then they produce more inflammatory chemicals that the body would make. Those inflammatory chemicals produce more estrogen, and it goes round and round and round. Okay, so you've got some pretty upset patches there. You've got the defective immunosurveillance that I spoke about. So normally, white blood cells would be going into those areas. Let's pretend you've ended up with some womb tissue around the intestines. White blood cells would normally be going in and going, oi, you're not supposed to be there. Come on, let's go. And, gobbling them up, attacking them, that sort of thing. And that probably happens on an everyday basis with women who have retrograde menstruation, for example, but it doesn't in lots of cases. And we end up with this kind of situation, And this is where also to say is that women who've got endo will have an immune type of issue or condition. So some of those theories are around things like, issues with cytokine production. So that means that you are more likely to produce those inflammatory cytokines just than somebody else. Yeah. So this whole kind of like what's going on with the immune system is kind of a whole interesting area. And that's where you do see these kind of like collections of autoimmune diseases or other types of immune issues going on as well. This is also why, particularly the early in your life that you're diagnosed with endo, if your, say, treatment was successful and you're now doing sort of great stuff to support it, the other reason you're doing that and to be motivated to look after yourself is to not collect up other types of immune conditions, because I promise you that women who've come to me have a whole bag of them, a whole job lot. And then we're actually trying to sort of like support this and support that, as well as dealing with the endo kind of within itself. Gut issues and complaints are extremely common in endometriosis. What I see is, a lot of gut dysbiosis, a lot of candida, a lot of bacteria. Now, that's a very complex subject, and so it's really easy to like think, well, I've got this, I've got that. This is where I'd say functional testing kind of comes into place, and spending your money on that is kind of worth it. But do work with a practitioner. Please do not just order gut tests off the internet. There are lots of microbiome tests out there. that is looking at whether you have certain types of bacteria. That's not isn't necessarily looking at disease pathogens, and you can end up spending a lot of money on a test like that, and actually a nutritional therapist would never use that kind of test. So I would not, I would advise against people just randomly ordering their own sort of their bowel kits and things. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is really common in endometriosis, which is why the low FODMAP diet can really kind of help with that as well. Just to say that low FODMAP diet is not a treatment. It helps to control symptoms, and so working with a nutritional therapist or naturopath is going to be great for you, looking at diet and specifically looking at herbal medicine, I would say, for helping with to kill off the bacteria that's there. But the gases that are produced when someone has SIBO can actually be uncomfortable and cause discomfort. So basically, if you have gut stuff going on, it can be affected obviously by endo, and you could have ended up like that because you've got endo, but then also by having the endo, it kind of makes it worse. So actually, by dealing with your IBS symptoms, for example, or if you've got dysbiosis symptoms, that is a way of you supporting your endo, because there's so much research now that points disease progression back to the gut. Okay, and I remember that 70% of your immune system is located in the gut as well. So there's also a new hypothesis from a few years back now, called bacterial contamination, and that looks at how bacteria and something called LPS, which is the kind of coating around the bacteria, is really inflammatory. And so their theory is some women can end up with endometriosis just because of gut bacteria changes. So this just kind of covers what I was also saying as well. But just to sort of add, it's like, any type of sort of imbalance that creates more inflammation is going to weaken the rest of the immune system and also potentially worsen endometriosis as well. And this is why I'm going to talk more about this. This is why healthy digestion and bowel movements are so important for eliminating toxins, eliminating estrogen, and just generally helping, the whole immune system, anyway. Stress is a real big problem for endometriosis. I mean, we know that stress is not good for us at all, for all of us anyway. But just some of the reasons why it's really unhelpful if you're managing endo symptoms. And of course, it's a difficult one because having the condition itself can feel stressful. So anything that you can do with nutrition and lifestyle to minimize stress is going to be brilliant. So stress itself is very nutrient hungry. It's using up a lot of our nutrient reserves. It's really common for me to see with lab testing and from symptoms, women who have endo and are also experiencing stress are very low in nutrients such as magnesium, for example, that help us to manage stress. And actually then those nutrients are not there to actually support the rest of the condition. So support the immune side of it, support the hormone side of it, for example. And stress can prevent the kind of normal balance of our body systems kind of happening in a sort of correct kind of way. We can get affected, our sleep gets affected when we're stressed, and this can have a knock-on effect in itself. With endo, we need a lot of really good sleep in order to decrease inflammation, help with mood, help with energy, hormone balance, that sort of thing. Stress also affects the production of other types of hormones, because again, when we're stressed, we're going to prioritize the production of stress hormones, because your body is still very much thinking it's going to be running away from a saber-toothed tiger, rather than you getting stressed out sitting at your desk worrying about a deadline for work. So it will elicit those production of stress hormones, but sort of in a way where we know that it's almost like it's too much. Stress is helpful in small amounts for when we kind of need it, like if we wanted to run away from something or fight something, but it's because it's that constant ongoing level of stress that kind of really sort of messes with things. The thyroid really doesn't like getting stressed. I will cover the thyroid in a future slide, so I'll come back to that as well. Talking about hormone production, so going back to previous slide comments from me, you're going back to the fact that your brain is talking to the female organs in terms of hormone production. And again, female hormone production is not going to be at a major priority if you're very stressed. Your body just wants to make sure that you can literally get through the day, fight or flight type mode, and that's it. Digestion is hampered when we get stressed out. This is actually because, of course, if you were frightened and needed to fight something, then you wouldn't be thinking about sitting down to have a nice meal. But of course, if you've got ongoing stress, that's going to affect digestion. And actually, when I see gut dysbiosis, it's not always that someone has an infection. They can have issues with digestion just because they're really stressed. So also their eating habits are affected. They don't sit down, they eat too quickly, not really engaging their enzymes with the whole process. The more also distant you are from your food. So what I mean by that is if you don't prepare your own food, so you're not smelling it and engaging with it and looking at it, means that you're not going to be producing the enzymes that you need. Your body just basically is like, whoa, you just ate something. I didn't even know you were going to do that, and this is actually where things like enzymes are really, really helpful. So taking those as a supplement, and then also using digestive herbs such as, lemon, artichoke, ginger, things like peppermint. Stress also reduces the capacity to clear estrogens, and we know that we need to clear estrogen so that things are kept in balance, so that we don't worsen that kind of buildup of hormones. And hormones like cortisol are actually quite inflammatory. This inflammation aspect as well also then affects other organs and tissues. So the thyroid can get inflamed, so it doesn't work as well, for example. And stress really wobbles blood sugar. And blood sugar can be kind of all over the place, and actually highs and lows of blood sugar will affect our energy, will affect our mood, will actually affect the immune system and inflammation. One thing I always try and convey to women is that if you've got PMS symptoms, looking at all sorts of reasons why you might do, but one reason that is often quite common is that you find that women actually are getting blood sugar highs and lows, and this really then affects their menstrual cycle and their premenstrual symptoms. So looking at the thyroid, so the thyroid controls your metabolic rate. So this is how slow or fast things happen in the body, and you have thyroid receptors everywhere, which means that all of your organs and tissue are kind of having a deep relationship with the thyroid. And one of the helpful things is that if the thyroid is working as it should allow a sort of steady flow of things moving through, and this can be all sorts of processes. If you think of how fast somebody is pushing a wheelbarrow in the garden to get rid of garden waste, for example, if you imagine in that wheelbarrow they've got all sorts of toxins and say estrogen. So if your person's a bit tired that day, they're going to be pushing the wheelbarrow really slowly. So it means that taking out that waste out of the garden is going to be slowed down. This also actually can slow down things like the bowel. And because estrogens are coming out of the liver once they're detoxed and into your bowel, the last place for you to remove those hormones is through a bowel movement. But a very common symptom of a sluggish thyroid or actual hypothyroidism, so that's low thyroid function, is to have lack of regular bowel movements and also constipation as well. A type of thyroid disease called Hashimoto's is actually quite common in endometriosis, and I work a lot with Hashimoto's. So this is an autoimmune condition, and this is where the thyroid itself isn't the issue, it's the immune system attacking the thyroid. And there are various different stages of Hashimoto's, which I'm not going to go into too much here to sort of deviate off track. But if you're interested in that, there's ways of looking into that as sort of deeper subject and things. But effectively what's going on is if you end up with thyroid antibody, so this is a way of seeing if the thyroid has gone into autoimmunity. Just to add to that, antibodies can kind of come and go, so it doesn't always mean that it's here to stay, but it is another sign of you being inflamed or somebody else being inflamed. So you can imagine if you put the two things together. And I think I was saying earlier in terms of my case chapter, there's a sort of query, like, does someone get Hashimoto's and then they get endo, or did they have endo and then get Hashimoto's? It's difficult to work that out sometimes, but you can see how one inflammatory condition is not going to help the next one. So the thyroid also needs a lot of really, really key nutrients that many of us miss out on too, significant ones that are actually low worldwide. So these are worldwide stats, are actually selenium, because it doesn't go back into the soil. So it's not available for us, through diet very easily. And then also iodine as well. So iodine is low in UK diets and also worldwide. Just to mention there, so if you're not having any eggs, meat, fish and dairy, so you're on a very vegan / sort of vegetarian diet, or you're perhaps missing out on these things because you have food intolerances or you don't like the taste of them, then the chances are that you're not getting access to iodine. And I think with vegan diets, it's always like B12, 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 but there's so many more nutrients you're going to miss out on. So got to look at, supplementation, or if you're eating well, but you may be missing out on nutrients that you do need, it's looking at where you can include more foods that include those nutrients, for example, as well. And look, if your thyroid's running a bit slow and you're going to be tired, which kind of means that even just coping with endometriosis is going to be much more tiring. Now, I really, really recommend private thyroid testing. Your NHS doctor or consultant is likely to only obviously check TSH and T4. You really want to have your T3, which is your active thyroid hormone, checked, and definitely antibodies. I'm pretty strict with my clients. I do a lot of functional testing anyway, but if they've only had standard thyroid checks done, I always make them pay for additional tests. And certainly looking at antibodies is really important, because also if you can catch antibodies really early on, you can kind of put plans in place to stop real, disease progression. Really, it's worth the money. Naturopathy and natural living and lifestyle. So these are, I think we all know these things anyway, but I think what I'm trying to get across is that if you have endometriosis, or you have a friend that does, or you have a member of your family that does, let's try and help yourself and try and help them, understanding that stress reduction and conserving energy is really important to think about. And yes, we would say that to anybody, but look, you've got a really complicated condition that needs specialist support and care. You need to have good sleep and good sleep waking cycles, because this influences hormones and the immune system. Disrupted sleep and poor sleep is really inflammatory. It really damages the immune system. They know that people who don't get consistent good sleep have a weak immune systems, and those people are just regular people who don't have endometriosis. You want a good access to morning light, because this actually supports sleep waking cycles, but also, not to go into it too much, but having a healthy body clock as well also regulates how the immune system does its own checks on itself. So what I mean by that is that we're all capable of producing what I call rogue cells. Some of those rogue cells will eventually go on to be cancer, but what your immune system is doing every day, all the time, and doing this to everybody, is constantly doing little assessments. Like, if you imagine a house, is there a leak in the roof? Do I need to paint a wall again? Shall I hoover the carpet? Do I need to clean things? Is this a bit dusty? Shall I repair that? And that's going on constantly. And actually, healthy sleep, waking cycles helps to support immune system with all of its checks and things, and repair and done sort of normally as well. And then proper breathing and breath work is brilliant and amazing. And actually, in the last year of kind of lockdown and pandemic, I found this really helpful for myself, but also for clients as well. And actually there's some great resources out there now if you want to learn how to breathe properly and things. So, because doesn't come natural to everyone, even though we're all breathing all the time. Proper breathing is not something that everyone does. Exercise and movement. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about suddenly that you have to be a gym bunny overnight. It's not about that. It's about movement to support, mental health. It's about movement to support like health in general, and actually finding out a strategy that works for you if you have endo, that also bears in mind the fact that you're going to have different energy levels every day. You're going to feel maybe more stiff and tight some days, and maybe find things easier the other day. So it's really about sort of like, and particularly anyway, I'm a really big fan of exercising and movement that's in tune with your menstrual cycle. So being aware that ovulation and the second half of your cycle, you need to kind of like slow things down, and certainly during your period as well. I mean, it's different for different people. Certainly with endo clients, I sometimes find if you can get them to do some really good stretching before their period, actually really reduces period pain, because it just kind of opens up that whole area, and actually just makes the letting go of blood just so much easier. Certainly maintaining a healthy weight is really, really important. I would also say, particularly if you are someone that has PCOS present in endometriosis, and PCOS is commonly seen in endometriosis. And yes, you can have both of the conditions together. Somebody asked me this recently, and yes, that's possible. So, you know, again, it's about just having healthy fat levels, because what happens with fat is that fat itself also has its own estrogen as well. So if you're over a healthy weight and you're wanting to lose weight as well, it's important to understand that if you're doing estrogen testing, your estrogen levels might fluctuate during that weight loss process, because you're actually releasing estrogens into the rest of the body out of the fatty tissue. So don't get worried if you're, I basically, what I'm saying is, I wouldn't be doing like full on estrogen detox panel type things with a practitioner. If you're right in the middle of a weight loss process, you're better off probably getting nearer your ideal weight and then kind of rechecking. And then, you know, on the flip side, like over exercising can really mess up your menstrual cycle. It can actually cause more inflammation. And since the immune system is already a little bit wobbled and weak in endometriosis, you have to be careful that over exercising doesn't actually make you feel more unwell, or doesn't tip you into like picking up a cold or something like that. So again, you know, it's about working with maybe somebody that can professionally support you in an exercise regime. But hey, just going on really long walks and doing simple stretches is really, really good. These are some of my favorite naturopathic kind of approaches for endo, and you can go away and look at these in more detail. This is just to kind of pinpoint in the right direction. So dry skin brushing is brilliant for supporting the lymphatic system, which means you're supporting the immune system and clearing out waste as well. I would have a look at some videos to do it properly. Castor oil packing is a way of supporting liver detox. Important to note that you must pack the liver area, and then you can pack another area that you want to sort of have help with. Hydrotherapy, I posted recently on my Instagram some videos and some text talking about why cold water exposure is really good. So cold water exposure is anti-inflammatory. It's good for mood. It's good for energy as well. So what happens if you're exposed to cold water a lot? You actually end up producing more brown fat. Brown fat is the stuff that babies have more of, but we kind of lose it as we age. And brown fat's really actually good for us. What I'm suggesting that you can do at home is doing hot and cold showers. So you start with warm water, and then you do a flash of cold, back to warm, back to cold, and you can do that as many times as you like, but I probably suggest between 6 and 8 alternations, but you must always end on warm. If you're not feeling very well, I don't recommend cold exposure. And if you are going through any kind of fertility support, and someone has said to you that perhaps your womb is a little bit cold or stagnant, perhaps speak to your practitioner about whether cold exposure is kind of suitable for you. So, the kind of environments we live in now are quite toxic. And, you know, when I speak to women who are particularly newly diagnosed with endo and they're wanting to sort of do all the things that they possibly can, one of the things to start doing, and I say start because it's expensive to try and clear everything out all at once, is start looking at your cleaning products in your house, like things you're using to clean the bath or the kitchen, cosmetics and body products, that sort of thing. Period products like bleach tampons, sanitary towels, and just slowly, where possible, just making kind of clever swaps. For example, in my kitchen, I don't have any non-stick pans because those are toxic. I use things like stainless steel. I have wooden utensils to cook with, so that I'm not using plastic, so plastic's not going to heat it up. And pretty much, apart from maybe one bottle of something really toxic to try and maybe get off the most stubborn stains that I probably use like twice a year, all my cleaning products are all natural, all my shampoos and cosmetics, etc. And look, hey, it won't be perfect. We all have a couple of items that are not going to work using it naturally, but it's a case of thinking, can I do it 90%? And again, my main message on this is, please don't get stressed out with this, and also please don't suddenly put yourself into debt by doing all this overnight. You know, just make changes as you kind of go along. I think if you made one immediate change, is to not use bleach tampons and not use commercially produced sanitary towels, and to look into different options. I would say not just because you're concerned about your endo, but just if you're concerned about the environment. You know, sanitary towels take something like hundreds and hundreds of years to break down. I actually swapped out in the last year to using period pants. So I wash them in the washing machine. And then if I wanted to use tampons, I've got completely natural tampons. So whatever works for you. I tried the Moon Cup. It didn't quite work. With the Moon Cup, it kind of depends, obviously, how you're structured inside. And I've got a slightly high sitting cervix that's slightly retroverted. So again, anatomy comes into play. So literally just experiment with it. So some of these toxins, what they'll do is they will come in and they'll mimic estrogens, but in a really toxic kind of way. So this is kind of the really, really important thing when I'm sort of pinpointing it with endo. And as I was saying sort of way back earlier in the sort of etiologies, there is a real environmental link with endometriosis. And where they've looked at studies, they've looked at women who actually live near factories that produce X whatever, but the byproducts of production of things like dioxins, there's quite a lot of research papers on that, and you see really high rates of endometriosis. So it's a bit like when people say to me, do you think that endo is more common? And I think I would be happy to say yes, but it's a difficult thing to say because you have to remember that our ability to diagnose it is easier. And of course, we talk about it. Nobody would have been talking about endometriosis on social media like 70 years ago. So, but I think I can confidently say I feel that that there's more endo around. Diet. So fatty acids are super important. So they are the base for what forms our hormones, and they help communication in the body. They also help to stabilize blood sugar. This also means that when you're eating meals as well, this means that you just feel more sort of filled up. I think to sort of summarize the fats, it's probably better to think of it like this. So the Mediterranean diet is something that I think a lot of us understand, and that's something that you want to be looking at in terms of healthy fat usage. And then certainly, using what I call old-fashioned fats are great to cook with. So in terms of cooking, safe to cook with coconut oil, butter, ghee, real ghee, animal fats, avocado, olive oil, if extra virgin. So if it's extra virgin and unfiltered, it means that it's got enough polyphenols to stabilize it with heat. Unsafe to cook with because they're not stable and they become very inflammatory are all the seed oils, including rapeseed oil. So just to give you a concept on that, so to be honest, even if you were just going to use sunflower oil, it would have to be cold pressed in a glass bottle that is dark, that you bought it from a fridge. Nobody really buys sunflower oil in that way. This is why, I'll give you an example. So if you've had certain food where they use a lot of oil in the cooking and it's quite high heat, I find that women with endo can feel very inflamed the next day. It can end up actually having an episode of pain. If you eat these types of oils during your period, I find that people's period pain is much worse. So you've got to get the fats thing right. And a lot of the way that the media talks about fats in terms of companies that are selling these products, like rapeseed oil companies, are just gonna make it sound good for them to sell their products. Oily fish, which I'll talk about more in a second, is your main source of omega-3. So if you're not eating oily fish and you're not supplementing with a fish oil supplement, you will be very low in omega-3. It's a real misnomer that you get a lot from a vegetarian vegan diet. Flaxseed oil you have to convert into readily available EPA and DHA. So those are the components of omega-3 that we use. So if you are not having oily fish or supplementing with an oily fish supplement, then you need to actually do your research on looking at really good vegan EPA and DHA oils that have been manipulated in terms of their levels, because otherwise the levels are really low. If you are trying to get pregnant, or you are pregnant and you're using a flaxseed oil and you're thinking that's going to provide you and your baby with another omega-3, again, absolutely no way. So the conversion from flax to DHA is really poor. So algae is much better, but algae does not have high levels of EPA. Algae is more rich in DHA. But the main thing here is we're looking at fats that support us for the body, but also offer that anti-inflammatory effect. The thing also about overeating, I would say, on like nuts and seeds, like don't overdo it, because if you're overdoing it, you're getting a lot more omega-6 in the diet, and omega-6 can become inflammatory. So omega-3 is very critical in endometriosis. So not just in terms of dealing with symptoms that you've already got, but actually implicated in disease progression. So omega-3 is important for controlling inflammation in the body, really kind of going back to the kind of the root at it. So, you know, when I'm talking to women with endo, I'm always going to bring this up as a first point, like, how much of this are you getting in your diet? And I would say, if you're listening to this in the UK, we're not very good here. I do think other countries are better at including fish in the diet. And then I do find a lot of vegetarian vegans are terribly educated on the subject, and so are using the wrong products, which is what I just said in the last slide. So this shows you the kind of omega-6 and omega-3 pathways. Now, just to break this down to make it more simple, omega-3 is helpful for producing an immune component called prostaglandins. And prostaglandins are involved in actually how much pain we have or not, and whether we're more inflamed or less inflamed. And to make this simple, omega-3 is always going to be good for us in terms of being anti-inflammatory, but too much omega-6, if it turns into something called arachidonic acid, which sounds like spiders, but it's not, so it's shortened to AA, then that's inflammatory. So I really caution against things like evening primrose oil, which again is very commonly recommended, like in magazines. And I'm sure if you walk into a pharmacy, they recommend that if you've got hormone imbalance issues. That's usually too much omega-6. People are not getting enough omega-3. To be honest, if you want to put evening primrose oil or starflower oil in, you needed to have done a fatty acid test profile with a nutritional therapist, who then can decide whether you actually need that or not. So important to have healthy bowel movements in order to excrete toxins, in order to excrete estrogens, and also just keep the health of the gut there. If you're not, regularly moving your bowels, you do allow little bugs and things and bacteria to sort of like hang around. Basically, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? So I think a lot of us know about healthy foods for the gut, as that's such a big sort of topic. I'm sure CNM will be doing other courses and lectures on that, so I'm not going to go on about that. I would just caution though on things that you'll see that you think are good for the gut, that then you suddenly start eating lots of, and then your endo symptoms feel worse. So fermented foods can cause excess histamine, and if you have excess histamine with endo, that's a problem, because it leads to pain, but also excess histamine leads to elevated estrogen. So again, caution with that as a topic. If you have problems with histamine, please work with a naturopath or nutritional therapist. And even though beans and legumes are great for us and they're a great source of fiber, and fiber is so important, and most of us are eating under the recommended 30 grams a day, we just need to all eat a lot more plants. When I look at food diaries, people still are leaning a lot towards more grains and things, and with that anyway, you really up your nutrition by including more plants, because you get the fiber and you get the nutrients. It's just much better than having just another plate of pasta. But beans and legumes can be tricky for some people, and that's also why I find that some women with endo are better leaning towards a more paleo diet. Not so much that you increase lots of meat, but more that you're like excluding grains and beans and legumes and sticking more to vegetables as a source of carbohydrate, if that makes sense. And then there are some lovely herbs that you can use that help to soothe and calm the bowel. Aloe vera I would include in this as well. 2 liters of water a day and lots of healthy fats just keep the bowels kind of moving. Again, less movement equals potentially more issues as well. There's my nighttime drink. This really kind of gets the bowels going as well. So that's olive oil, flaxseed powder, a juice of 1 lemon, 100 ml of sugar, free prune juice. I'll just pause on this slide. So if you want to take a photo of that recipe just before I move on. And any exercise or movement that stimulates muscles in the abdomen. I mean, if you want to be sort of thinking, does that work or not? How many of you have done some sort of abdominal exercise or gone for a bit of a jog or something, and then come home and gone, oh, I think I need the toilet now? So, really eating a rainbow diet. There's more research on here than I've actually covered. I'm a very researched, evidence-based nutritionist, so I do a lot of research into endo, particularly as I talk to doctors and nurses and other scientists. So again, we're kind of leading with research, and more and more we have this type of evidence coming out that this kind of really makes a difference in terms of women being low in nutrients that you would normally find in delicious foods such as colourful vegetables and fruit. And again, these are all sources of fiber, and cruciferous vegetables that I'm going to show on the next slide are important for detoxification for estrogens, but also metabolism. So that means that also that sort of it's like the safe packaging up of the estrogens that are maybe a little bit more naughty and making them sort of easy estrogens, and again just helping you with kind of safe exit in the body. So here's a nice selection of our cruciferous vegetables as well. I'll just pause for you to take a photo again if you want to. So vegan or not to vegan, I would say it's very person dependent. I've got clients where going vegan has made a massive difference for them because foods like dairy and meat were inflammatory. You need to also go in though with your eyes open and do your research, and I would say ideally work with somebody, and also being open to the idea that, you know, having periods of time being vegan may be helpful, but then also having periods of time where coming back to having animal products could be helpful too as well. You do miss out on a lot of nutrients, and it is very difficult to get some of those nutrients from a vegan diet. Like choline is almost non-existent. So the amount of vegans that I speak to where I say, so you're supplementing choline, are you? And they're like, no, is really, really, really common. So absolutely a fan of that diet if you do it in the right way, and you need to consider supplementation. And also for some, it's not that they're doing it for the ethics of it. They're doing it because it helps with symptoms. But again, keeping an eye on things like, you know, is my iron good or not? The other thing also to mention is that B12 isn't available in a vegan diet, but other B vitamins are like folate or B6, for example. But you need to remember that in plant form, they're not always very high in their methylated form, and their kind of active form. So this is why also where if you kind of know that, I know methylation is a complicated, weird word, I'm not going to go into it, but if you have heard of that topic and perhaps you even know that you have issues with methylation and you are following a vegan or vegetarian diet, this is again where you need to look at supplementing methylated nutrients, or just speaking to a nutritionist about how to do that. Yeah, so as I said, you know, good for some, not for others, and it could be a case of coming off and on it. Also looking into alternatives as well, so perhaps A2 milk suits you better, having goats or sheep cheese. Certainly for me, I'm not very good with dairy because I'm lactose intolerant, so but I find it a little easier to tolerate some goat's cheese here and there. And you know, for me as a nutritionist, actually I don't want to exclude lots of foods all the time because it's actually quite stressful, and also then you're worrying about the person being low in nutrients. So you know, it's not a case of thinking I'd have to take everything out of my diet, otherwise I'm never going to fix my endo. If you think like that, you're just going to get stressed, and I already covered the fact that stress isn't good. So if you're getting really, if this whole subject is worrying you, please work with a naturopath or nutritionist. And actually, if anyone's listening who's a student, you can see that there's a whole gateway to helping clients with these kinds of questions. So gluten, I could probably do a whole presentation just on this. The research on the direct link with endo is really minimal, but there's so much research on gluten and autoimmunity conditions, and also thyroid disease. And so actually think of it this way: if you've got thyroid disease and you're eating gluten, it's making it worse. It's probably going to make your endo worse because the thyroid's getting worse, and the thyroid is not there to support the rest of the body, including speeding up clearing estrogen. So you're going back to the vision I gave you. You've got the person in the garden with the wheelbarrow with all the toxins and estrogen, and how quickly are they pushing it kind of out of the garden. And you know, I have seen great situations where, well, thousands of situations where women remove gluten and find it really helps with their symptoms. And you know, sometimes you can remove it for some time and then maybe occasionally have it as a treat. And then I certainly always say, if you're going to have it as a treat, really make it a good treat. You know, perhaps you've gone on holiday and you want to have a pizza in Italy, maybe rather than a pizza here. Just some kind of more research for you on that. Just also remember that wheat and gluten are considered to be high FODMAP. So it could be that you don't tolerate wheat because of it being high FODMAP, and that later you might do. But what I'm saying is that even if you did tolerate it, you need to look at it from an autoimmune perspective and just an immune perspective. What else to remove from your diet? So sugars and hidden sugars, we know about that anyway. Alcohol can be quite inflammatory. Some people actually, when they detox alcohol, they make it more toxic, because remember that all of us use substances differently. The way to understand that is when people have drug reactions. So some people will process something much faster So for example, with me, I make something called acetaldehyde really quickly. So actually, in a way, when I get a hangover, and I don't drink very often at all, I'm kind of feeling more unwell from the detox process. And then also, it's looking at different types of wine, for example. So looking for organic wine that's biodynamic, so it's not had sulfates filtered. So some women are going to be reacting to sulfates. And of course, we use alcohol as a way of dealing with pain and also for sleep, but it tends to be a very short-term approach. So I'm not saying don't ever have a drink. I'm just saying do it in a considered way rather than you're kind of relying on it. Caffeine is not great because it kind of wobbles blood sugar and it's not great for stress hormone production. But also tannins are quite constricting. So when I work with women, it's really fun when you look at people's menstrual diaries and they start to almost like know that if they have tea and coffee premenstrually or during their period, they get more period pain. But if they kind of go back to maybe having chamomile tea or rooibos tea, or maybe just kind of having a little bit less tannin, so things like green teas, that makes a difference with menstrual pain. Food intolerances, you need to pay attention to those because they can weaken the rest of the immune system, which is not great in endo, and also be a source of discomfort and pain and just increased inflammation. So again, it's about working with a practitioner. I don't recommend those kind of like home test kits that you can just buy for like £100 for food intolerance. They're not very accurate. You could do the test one day and do it the next day, and it would just tell you different things. Please work with a professional. And then histamine intolerance is a real thing, and therefore people get histamine intolerance for different reasons. So I would work with a practitioner because it can be because you don't have the enzyme to break it down. It can be gut dysbiosis, all sorts of things going on. But just to explain, so histamine affects estrogen by meaning that high histamine makes more estrogen, and then it also reverses on itself, so estrogen can make more histamine as well. Just to explain that as an example, what can happen is you can start to see histamine issues in perimenopause because when women get really big fluctuations of estrogen. So that's kind of an interesting area in itself. Herbal medicine and botanicals. So this is just kind of a summary of things that I want to have a look at. So vitamin D status needs to be really important. So it's like understanding that it's not just like I want to have a good immune system with vitamin D. We're really talking about it being an immune manager, or even better, think of it as like a CEO of a big company. If your CEO in your big company is, not a good CEO, you're going to not be performing as you should do. So vitamin D, and it is still just shocks me that even though vitamin D information I think is probably quite well shared by the government and NHS, how many people are still just not understanding this whole subject, particularly people who are more at risk as well. So if you have dark skin, you're indoors a lot. So again, if you're confused on that subject, please get some help with that. Iron, I should have written ferritin on there. So iron is your circulating iron, and then ferritin is your stored iron. And just having hemoglobin measured is not an accurate measurement of whether your iron and ferritin stores are good. Iron and ferritin can often be low in endometriosis because of excessive menstrual blood loss. And remember, it's important for energy, it's important for healing, and you need to have enough iron to power your detox pathways. Okay. So Fe, which is the scientific symbol for iron, is involved in those detox pathway, biochemical pathways. Magnesium and B vitamins, indole 3-carbinol. So just to say that's an extract from cruciferous. You must not use DIM, which is spelled DIM. DIM is another derivative or compound of cruciferous vegetables, and Americans like to use it, but in fact it's not officially allowed to be recommended if you are part of certain nutrition associations, because you can really do quite a lot of harm with it. So if you're using DIM, please stop using it. If you're recommending it, stop recommending it. Okay. Indole 3-carbinol is, and at Wild Nutrition we have our endo complex, and this contains indole 3-carbinol and other vitamins and minerals as well. Zinc is low in endo, research shows us, and zinc is important for the immune system, for hormones, for mood, for repair. So it's really super important that you have good zinc levels. Serrapeptase and bromelain are enzymes that work not on you digesting your food. They work in a sort of global effect. So you take them away from food, and they're good at eating away at inflammation that's supposed to be eaten away at. So they safely removed inflamed tissue. It's a long-term game, you know, but it does really help. Methylated B vitamins, because methylation is actually one of the most important biochemical actions to detoxify estrogens. And some people will have issues with methylation if you've done sort of genetic sort of panels and things. Something to bear in mind that you're going to need those types of B vitamins. So again, what I was saying about vegan vegetarian diets, get less of the methylated form. So supplementation is key. Turmeric, fantastic anti-inflammatory. Great for women's health in general. So I use it for PCOS. I use it for period pain, like anyway. It's good if you've got musculoskeletal issues with endo, because it's good for that. So it's good for the joints, etc. And it's good for the gut as well. I mean, this is why they've been obviously using it in countries like India for thousands of years. In terms of like favorite herbs, Agnus castus is just wonderful. It helps to encourage progesterone production. It doesn't contain progesterone, but it encourages it. You can take it throughout your whole cycle, but you don't take it during your actual period. And it's not recommended in pregnancy. So if you have been taking it and you become pregnant, please stop using it as well. Please don't take it if you're on the pill, because it will stop it working. So they sort of interfere with each other as well. And again, I would say work with a medical herbalist if you want more information on that. It's called often Vitex Agnus castus. That's from the Latin. Funny thing here is that monks used to take it because I think they thought it made them more chaste. So it's also called chasteberry, meaning not wanting to have sex. I promise you it does the opposite from that. It's actually great for libido. It's great for fertility. So if you've got an irregular cycle and you're wanting to balance the cycle, that is really good for that. But I would caution, because you can get your cycle so good and so regular that you can kind of become pregnant more quickly than you thought. So just kind of bear that in mind if that's not your intentional plan. Dong Quai is a really great womb herb, and it's very kind of stimulating and supportive. It helps to metabolize estrogens. It's not an estrogenic herb. There's a lot of misinformation on the internet that puts it into that category. That's not the case. It's also very good for getting a period going. You can take a sort of double or triple dose if you feel like your period's about to start, but it's just hanging on and not actually getting on with it, and you're getting spotting but not a full period, and maybe all the sort of cramps and the feeling like you're going to come onto a period but nothing's happening. So I use it for cycle regulation as well. Blood sugar, plants and herbs like berberine, nutrients like chromium. And again, remember, blood sugar fluctuations affect mood, hormone balance, inflammation. They stress us out, so important to balance that. Herbs for the gut like oregano, golden seal, parderco, berberines. There are a lot of gut herbs, and there are lots of products which have got really good combinations with all sorts of things. But again, if you think you've got like ongoing IBS or infections, or perhaps got SIBO or anything like that, I think working with a practitioner is better. Anything that helps the liver, so milk thistle, dandelion, burdock, they're all lovely digestive herbs. They also help you to break down fats, which is important, because also, thinking about breaking down dietary fats. So if you're eating a lot of really good fats, but you're not really metabolizing them, absorbing them, you're going to end up pooing them out. So if you've got stools that float a lot, you've definitely got issues with fat metabolism. And then the adaptogenic herbs, which just are going to support, everything, hormone balance, the immune system, energy, the brain, the heart, all of those things. And my favorite ones are Siberian ginseng, which is Eleutherococcus, which is not the same as a classic ginseng, so it won't give you that weird buzzy coffee feeling. And then lovely ashwagandha, and then also maca as well. Maca is a nice one because it's also because you can eat it as a food. It's also rich in things like magnesium and calcium and other nutrients, and that's why it's so popular in countries like South America. And then also nerve herbs. So like these are really good for like winding down from the day, helping to sleep. A lot of women I meet who've got endo get very anxious, just feel like they've got that feeling in their tummy. So these are just lovely, soothing, calming, and also if you're recently diagnosed, you might be not feeling yourself. And so anything that just can kind of help your mental health is really good. Health tests. So these are tests that you would do with a practitioner, but I just thought I'd sort of show you. So blood tests for estrogen are not reliable because it's just going to show you the circulating estrogen from that day. You don't know about localized production, and we don't know about estrogen metabolites. So practitioners like me that practice functional medicine, are using these types of tests where estrogen is measured through urine. And also what you're seeing is that estrogen is measured in terms of how you're detoxing it. So I know that some of those some of those words and numbers are going to be complicated, but just the take home from this is estrogen is not just estrogen. Estrogen goes through different stages and phases and gets detoxed, and actually through that process can be fine or turn into estrogens that are a bit more toxic. So it's all about controlling all of that, you know. Stool testing. So like I said earlier, you know, there's a lot of research, new research now around the state of the gut and different types of bacteria and how that can affect endometriosis and inflammation. And so this is just to show you kind of on here, the Pretovelia copri, the one that's very high, is directly linked to endometriosis as well. Again, checking your iron levels, as I mentioned earlier, checking vitamin D, full thyroid panels. I'll just pause on that so that you can take a photo. And this is urine cortisol testing as well. And so this is showing you cortisol, you know, through your sleep waking cycles. And we need cortisol in the right balance, but also the right balance at different times of the day. So this can show you if things are dysregulated, like, or not. And obviously cortisol can be inflammatory as well. And also it's about whether you can be making high levels of cortisol, but are you getting rid of it as well? So if you're not metabolizing it, if you have problems with weight, for example, and you're doing all these things to try and lose weight, but you're not, it's good to kind of do some tests like this. And again, this is functional medicine testing that you should be doing with a practitioner, not trying to figure out yourself. This test, by the way, is also helpful for PCOS as well. This is the peer-reviewed evidence-based textbook that I contributed to, and there's my chapter there. This is available from Amazon and other sellers, and it's aimed at nutrition students, health practitioners, and medics. Where you can get hold of me, so that's my website address and my Instagram, where I post all sorts of things about endo and other women's health conditions and healthy lifestyle. So it's just my @ and then my full name. Don't forget the E in Davis. People always get that wrong. And then, as I'm head of nutrition at Wild Nutrition, we are offering everyone who's attended the seminar a 15% discount, which is valid for the next 2 months. It's activated from the 9th of March, and that is code ENDOCNN15. I'll just pause so you can make a note of that. We're the only supplement company to have a specific product for endometriosis called Fuga and Endo Complex, and I'm on clinic sabbatical for extra study, but I do have a team of wonderful nutritionists where we offer mini consultations. So you can have a chat for a short amount of time, talking about diet, lifestyle, and recommendations. And our supplements are completely natural, synthetic free, and no fillers and binders. We also B Corp registered, so we're completely sustainable, environmentally friendly. And then if you want specific herbal medicine support, particularly want to discuss things like Agnes Castor's, I would contact Herb Sands Healing and speak to the medical herbalist about their formulas and just kind of advice on that as well. Well, thank you so much for attending, and I hope this has been really, really helpful. And if you're on your endo journey, I hope you don't feel alone, and wishing you kind of all the best. Thank you.
I'd lasted about 3 months at uni, trying to be a dancer and do English and do all the right things, but it wasn't actually my passion. And I heard about CNM, so I went to an open evening, and Charlotte Gerson from the Gerson Therapy was there. And oh my gosh, she was just amazing. She blew me away with some of the things that she was saying about how the body could actually heal itself. And I signed up for a 5-year course that very day and absolutely loved it. I just kept learning from then on in because CNM offered so many good courses. And as soon as I'd qualified, I thought, now's the time to do something with this. So literally within 6 months, I'd been able to set up practice. I personally employ CNM students or CNM graduates. We have 5 CNM graduates here in different capacities, like as a nutritionist or an advisor within the shop, or even as a herbalist. The knowledge that they have is absolutely amazing, and I can trust them. I can really trust them with my clients. I've built up a business over the past 18 years, and that reputation is everything to me. So knowing that the CNM graduates have the right knowledge and also have the confidence to speak with my clients is great. I have no qualms about bringing on students because I know how good they are.
But I was looking to finish my old job, and I wanted to put myself in an environment where I was surrounded by herbs or nutrition or that kind of thing. Because I knew if I didn't make the switch, I'd probably just carry on doing my old job and not giving it up because of the money, basically. So yeah, and Gabby was looking for someone, so that's when I made that switch about 1.5 years ago.
I've now been lecturing for the CNM for about 6 years, and I lecture across the board as in the nutrition field, naturopathic field, and for the herbalism as well. And I love it. I think the lectures are so well structured. I love the information on the slides. I love the fact that it really brings it together quite cohesively for a student when they're then writing assignments about it. My husband often says to me, "You're so lucky that you love your job," and it's true, because if I won the lottery, I know full well nothing would change. I love what I do, and when clients are sitting with me, they actually say, "I can feel your passion, you love what you do, don't you?" I say, "I love it."
My name is Melissa Catt and I studied nutrition with CNM in Cork. So my favourite part about the course in CNM was the clinics. I found it really gave me the confidence that I needed to actually go out and practice on my own afterwards. I think without that I probably wouldn't have gone straight into my own practice. So after I graduate, I've opened my own clinic, so Nona Nutrition, and I plan on specialising in women's health and pregnancy nutrition. I always had an interest in nutrition, and I was always doing small nutrition courses, but then when I found CNM, I just knew it was the college for me, and I was working in a health store at the time, so it just kind of went hand in hand for me to do it. So CNM has changed both mine and my family's life, because I now have the knowledge to support us health-wise, and it's given me the opportunity to become self-employed and to work my hours around my family and my clinic as well. I would recommend the course to someone else. I think if you've an interest in nutrition, it's definitely the course for you. The content is fantastic. The clinics give you the confidence that you need to go out and be a successful practitioner.